Today is December the 13th. Today, we see that Judaism returns to Palestine. In reading through the Bible in a year today, I'd like you to read Ezra chapters 6 through 10. As we begin chapter 6, yesterday, we saw that both Israel and the locals had written first King Artaxerxes, who said to stop the rebuilding of the temple, then Darius. In chapter 6, Darius made a search of the archives, and he found that Cyrus had indeed authorized the rebuilding of the temple. So he sends a message to the locals and says, go ahead and rebuild. The temple is built in chapter 6, and it is dedicated. Now, the dedication is large. We do not see the cloud of God's glory revisiting the temple, though. Passover is celebrated. And then in chapter 7, Ezra arrives. Ezra performs the function of a prophet. He comes and he looks around. Artaxerxes writes Ezra a letter. Now, this well may be Artaxerxes kind of changes his tone from what he writes in chapter 5, chapter 4, where he says, stop rebuilding the temple. In chapter 6, he says, or chapter 7, he says to Ezra, rebuild Judaism when you get there. Chapter 7, verse 25, you, Ezra, are to use the wisdom your God has given you to appoint magistrates and judges who know your God's laws to govern all of the people in the province west of the Euphrates River. Teach the law to anyone who does not know it. Punish those who disobey the law. That's quite a change on Xerxes' part, and it may be that Esther has taken place. Artaxerxes has become aware of the existence of the Jews, and his own queen is a Jewess. So he asks Ezra to reinstitute the obedience of God's law, reinstitute Judaism in Palestine. Well, Ezra arrives in chapter 7, in chapter 8, and in chapter 9, he sees that many have intermarried with what he calls pagan wives. He calls Israel's attention to it, and in chapter 10, they confess their sin and divorce the pagan wives. Now, don't let that disturb you. All through Israel's history, there's a long history of people coming to Israel, accepting Judaism, and then being recognized as Jews. Many of David's personal army, among them Uriah the Hittite, were actually foreigners. But they lived among the Jews because they had embraced Judaism. The pagan wives also could have embraced Judaism. The issue is not so much their bloodline. The issue is their religion. They continued to worship pagan gods. Even wives of priests were worshiping pagan gods. Ezra in chapters 9 and 10 draws Israel's attention to this and says, no, we need to serve God and Him alone. That's what these chapters are about. So here in the last half of the book of Ezra, we see Judaism reinstituted in Palestine in the temple. Like, follow, and subscribe to this devotional on whatever platform you use to listen to it. Email your questions to us at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow, we'll look at the last two Psalms of David in the book of Psalms.